Bonjour à tous.
Bonjour.
Bonjour, can you hear me? Klaus Kümmerer speaking.
Yes, we can hear you fine, thanks. Very well.
So.
Perhaps you can load your presentation
Yes.
So that we can share.
Oh, yeah, I'm still a little bit in a hurry
thing.
coming back from lecture.
And probably.
Well, I can share my screen?
Yes.
So let's see.
Yeah, we can see your screen and we can see you, so that's perfect for us.
Wonderful.
Wunderbar, alles im Butter.
Sehr gut. Très bien. Good. So give me just a minute. I have to pick up a glass of water. I just taught students.
No problem.
So now I'm ready.
Okay, so we will introduce the session in just 1 second, and then I will give you the word. Still some people coming in.
Yep, no problem. So I have noted I have a presentation, 30 minutes plus minus, and then we will have a discussion.
Yes.
Also half an hour or?
3 hours approximately. No, just about 10 minutes, I think.
Yeah?
20 minutes.
Oh, that's fine. Good. Happy to do so.
If we have...
Yeah, because I'm just asking because I can attend then also some of the later stuff, more hopefully tomorrow. But later on I have to teach again. I'm really sorry about this. But I noticed that, yeah, it was demanding to get acquainted to Corona, but it's also demanding to get acquainted or used to a more relieved life, I would say, because I wasn't aware, it looked for a long time, that the university will not be open or not complete, but we have started completely on campus, and therefore that's a little bit a challenge. I'm really sorry. I would have liked to be with all of you in the wonderful Strasbourg.
Well, thank you very much. You are not the only one who was in this situation, and so, but it seems to work well. So now that the last people are coming in, I will introduce the session. So welcome to this session 3 entitled Sustainable Goods, Services and Processes, an Evolving and Diversified Implementation, ? So my name is Stéphane Vuilleumier, and I have the pleasure and the honor to co-chair this session. I'm a professor here at University of Strasbourg and a group leader, CNRS, for environmental microbiology. So thank you very much for the organizers for putting together all this and for letting me take you through this afternoon session. So just a few words, if I may, to introduce this session. Looking at the program, I think there might be some shared keywords for the presentation of this session, and this could be, perhaps the speakers will prove me wrong, but I think one term is thinking about cycles rather than just thinking about recycling, and thinking in terms of systems and in terms of pragmatical decision taking. Also, probably not shying away from revisiting and discussing some key factors that everybody has in mind in decision taking, such as progress and democracy, big words. So I think we have a very ambitious and very exciting session ahead this afternoon. And I just want also to remind you quickly of a general timeline. We'll have 2 30 minutes keynote addresses with plenty of time for discussion, and then for further presentations, 20 minutes presentations with discussion as well. There will be a break after the third presentation. So plenty of time to discuss, and before and after the coffee break. So let's start, and let me just introduce briefly our first keynote for this afternoon. So Professor Kümmerer, who is a professor for sustainable chemistry and material resources at and director of the International Research and Education Sustainable Collaborative Center, ISC3, at University of Lüneburg, and he's live with us from Lüneburg, as he just explained. So Professor Kümmerer is a key person in the field of green chemistry in Europe, and I would like personally to mention the fact that I really like his work on remediation of contaminants as a microbiologist, because this often involves microbes, and I am a microbiologist, so bioremediation. And if I may also, what I really like in your recent work that I became aware of is your commitment to think ahead about chemistry in the context of sustainability, and especially the importance of taking into account sustainable thinking, if there is such a thing, for education of chemistry. So that was a bit long, sorry for that, and I would like to leave the floor to you and for your talk, Chemistry for Sustainability. The floor is yours, please.
Yeah, thank you for your more than kind introduction. Thanks a lot for your kind work and making connections also to your work. And that's already the first example. It would have been so much better to be on site and to discuss in the breaks, etc., and to see some more links maybe, or to have an exchange. So I'm very sorry again that I cannot attend in person, which I would have liked to do in the beginning, or that was the plan. Yeah, you're right. I started also with biodegradability of pharmaceuticals in the environment, and then someday I was not very pleased anymore to find out that most of these pharmaceuticals and other chemicals are not degraded, not mineralized by microbes in the environment. And I was then interested in what could be solutions, and not the 700 risk assessment for the 800 compound. And that brought me in contact with green chemistry. And later on, we further developed a concept called sustainable chemistry, or started also to develop with others. And as you nicely summarized already, I could say from your introduction, what are shared lines with others here maybe, how chemistry can make a sustainable contribution to sustainability. It's not enough just to have a contribution, a sustainable contribution to sustainability. It has to be done in a sustainable manner. And that's what my talk is about. Yeah, chemistry and sustainability. We have yesterday heard a very nice presentation about planetary boundaries, yeah, which for me is one of the big pictures. I also have some questions, some points to discuss, as has been done yesterday. But you know this here. And interestingly, synthetic chemicals are summarized here as novel entities together with GMOs. Probably because there are so many on the one hand, and on the other hand, each molecule is an individual. So that's one of the things here. The other is then that we have the SDGs. For my understanding, they are more concrete and would not say refer or have been developed because of, but maybe they are on a level lower. The Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, I think they are well known here. And then we come already to chemistry. How could chemistry fit in their sustainable chemistry, or later on I will also call it, as you can see here, chemistry for sustainability. And then we have to think about, as a subtopic, chemistry for a circular economy or within a circular economy. And only then it comes to greener chemistry, which is about products and synthesis of products. Important, all these are human value propositions. So these are normative approaches, even green chemistry, chemistry in a circular economy. Nature does not tell us that, for example, circularity is better than linearity. And nature is not interested. Nature does what it does. Else, if we would think nature tells us what to do, that would be a fallacy. So chemistry as a science, on the other hand, is non-normative. Atoms do what they do, molecules do what they do under given conditions. However, if we go to the industrial practice of chemistry, also in the lab, sure, but more in the industrial practice of chemistry, then we have intentions, we select conditions that molecules, atoms behave as we want to the sake of something positive. So therefore, here we are crossing the borderline already between normative and non-normative. Yeah, products of industrial chemistry. Now I'm talking about industrial chemistry. Normally you have both connotations of chemistry, the science and the industrial sector. And the industrial sector is not just the industry, like the big companies like DuPont or like BASF. There's much more also including downstream users. So these chemistries or these industries, they produce the polymers, but the products you see here of plastics, these are different chemistry, these are different sectors. Therefore, we call them also part of the chemical sector and downstream users. And as you can see, I guess you are aware, chemistry is virtually everywhere around us. In each of the products, even our body, biochemistry, etc. And that's a huge chance. That's also a challenge. And on the other hand, I would say we could not become more sustainable in the future without chemistry. But we need a better or different chemistry, or to be more precise, a different understanding on the purpose of chemistry. So this 150 years going on success story, I think one of the oldest industries we have, brought about 350,000 chemicals that are globally on the market. Different entities, different, could say characters. And thereof about 30,000 are environmentally relevant. Probably it's even more because several of these are in the environment transformed, non-biotic or biotic, by bacteria, for example, by fungi, but often not completely mineralized. And these products we call products of incomplete degradation or transformation products. Or if products are altered by sunlight or by temperature during their lifetime, also often such products, such new molecules result. Even in Europe, where we have reached since 15 years quite a stringent regulation, 60% of the chemicals used in terms of volume in products are hazardous to health. So lots of things still to do. Worldwide, about 1.6 million deaths in 2016 had been attributable to chemicals. Many more are probably affected, not resulting in death. And we see more and more chronic or beyond chronic toxic effects. Neurological behavioral disorders caused by chemicals is one of the latest. So that's very challenging to discover and to monitor and to make a cause-effect relationship. Also because of the long time scales. Probably we have to abandon here our classical understanding of natural science, cause and effect. And that also demonstrates here that precautionary, which is the basis of European policy, is very important in the future even more. If we would take a blood sample from all of you in the audience and pool it, we would find several hundred synthetic chemicals in your blood. So that's the backside of it. And it's not only the products, it's all the unintended emissions, it's also products brought into the environment by intention, by usage, pesticides, pharmaceuticals, odorants, think of your personal care products, shampoo, etc., but also abrasion by use, tires, facades, catalytic converters from cars. Some of the products like the plastics, they lose chemicals, constituents, the flame retardants, the plasticizers, and we have lots of waste at the end of life. And even most of it is collected in our countries, in Europe, still not all, let alone what's going on the planet. So waste is increasing. That's one of the trends. If production is increasing, waste is also increasing. Think of textile. 600 chemicals are used to produce textiles in about 8,000 different products, mixtures and so on. Most stay on the fibers, even if needed only for production, until the end of life. And they pollute groundwater if they are dumped like here. And what's sometimes told customers, yes, we will collect and recycle. Sometimes it's not recycling, it's just dumping in the countries where the textiles have produced originally. I'm sure you are aware of microplastics, but there's also microplastics as part of products, for example, cosmetics and other products, but some of this is also coming from debris, the result of breakdown of microplastics in the environment. Tiny particles. We have here again a highly complex mixture within polymers and of polymers, additives, and also be aware 2/3 of this microplastic is already on the seafloor. So we will never get hold on it again. There is no reversibility, even if some people try to collect a little bit on the surface. The same for electronic waste, complex products. Just think about a mobile, many elements in there, many molecules, many materials. The same holds for there are plastics in with additives. Steep increase. Yeah, there is about 4% increase in annual e-waste generation, and it's about nowadays it's about 5,000 tons per year, which equals about the weight of the Eiffel Tower. And the increasing rate is about 4% per year nowadays. On the other hand, resources are running short. You see here, water is running short in terms of amount. That does not mean that the planet loses a lot of water, but the quality is going down, and especially in arid zones where we have most probably of the climate crisis to expect, more water would be needed because population increase, but also because these areas are most infected by climate crisis and elevated temperatures. Using renewable resources, you can see here, is in competition with land for farming and other purposes. And also, if you do it on an economical basis, often needs fertilizer and pesticides. And the metals, this symbolizes nicely where we are, not only for the metals, we have to dig deeper to get out the same, or sometimes digging deeper, more effort to get less than before. The low-hanging fruits are already harvested in terms of amounts and in terms of quality. And if the quality is low, we need more and more energy and other products to grade up the quality, which results often and always also in waste again. Nowadays we discuss, we have new ideas. Let's use carbon dioxide as a resource. On the one hand, this amount we would use for products would not really make an impact on reducing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And carbon dioxide is not by chance the end product of each incineration. It's the most stable reaction product, the most stable molecule. So carbon dioxide is here, and if we want to make something else out of it, we have to lift it up in energetical terms. That's often not talked about. And that's a lot of energy we need here. This energy is already in the fossil resources, where nature over a long time has done this for us. So that's one point. And we need many materials to get the renewable energy to make from sunlight electricity, and then all the nice products here, synthetic fuel, hydrogen, etc. So let's have a broader look. We need also metals, neodymium, for example. Probably you have never heard about neodymium, so-called rare earth metal. In fact, not really rare, but challenging to get. And there's another one. If we are in France, I have to mention lutetium, which is the old name for Paris, because there it was discovered. And that's even more abundant than gold, but it's not so visible. And if we would like to render the German chemical industry greenhouse gas neutral until 2050, that would need more or less all the energy we use nowadays in Germany. How should this work? And if we talk about synthetic fuels or electromobility, that's not the right question. The first question has to be, which type of mobility would fit in where best? And then we can think about, okay, under this situation, maybe it's electromobility, there it's synthetic fuel. And first of all, we should think about how should we have an infrastructure and a planning of our cities that we need less mobility. So chemistry has to fit in, and then maybe chemistry can come up with nice solutions. Yeah, I mentioned already the metals. We have not only an increase in volume, we have also, like in analogy to biodiversity, an increase in chemodiversity. And one of the important drivers, especially for metals, are all these renewable energy items, but also communication. LEDs. People say, yeah, they're saving energy. That's true for a single unit. But if you just look around, where do we use them nowadays? And how bright is everything illuminated compared to 10 years, 20 years ago? And these are tiny parts. How will we ever be able to collect them? And the same holds also for organic molecules, which you see here. There's a steep increase the number of registered chemicals, organic chemicals, in a database. The message here is the increase. The number what it's going to market is much lower, but even there we will have an increased chemodiversity. Increasingly complex products. Here, just a nice shirt. You know, probably it's not just this shirt and a little bit of color of dye. There are different fibers: polyester, cotton, elastan, polyurethane, for example, for the applications here. Dyes. In fact, about 600 chemicals for textile manufacturing are in use. I have mentioned this, and most stays on the textile. And data for Germany, for example, tell us that about 20% of textiles are worn only once. So that's not about chemistry, that's about habits and behavior as a consumer, but also on a market who is supply driven. Yeah, I mentioned already what is in your mobile. Approximately 40 elements plus their compounds, that means oxides or halides and so on. But also small molecules like plasticizers, flame retardants. These are persistent organic pollutants. We find them everywhere on this planet. Yeah. So, and only a few of these metals are nowadays collected and recycled. Most of them are lost. The rare earth metals, it's about 1.5 to 2% which are only recycled. And the question is, by the way, how many mobiles do you have at home in your drawer? Average data in Germany tell it's about 3. Strange, isn't it? Another example, car on the left side, you see where you have plastics. Different plastics, different kinds of plastics, different additives. And on the right side, also a car, could be the same, but I didn't find an appropriate picture. Here you could say all of the electronics. So that's a plastic computer on wheels nowadays. And only for driving. That's what we want normally, driving, mobility. But all the others is now into. So if we have a look on chemistry and the products, we have to think about from the very beginning, resources and synthesis, about the use of a product, and not just starting with synthesis, and the lifetime, and whether it should be circulated. Circular economy is not just about recycling, or whether it should be shared. Then we have other needs that we have to come along with, also from a material basis, for chemistry basis, compared to if it should be recycled. Yeah, if it should be recycled, then disassembling is important. First, on building block level. Do not think first on recycling at atomic or molecular level. And then, for example, we need nowadays adhesive which can be loosened again. Or we should use screws again. If you have a fridge and the pump is broken nowadays, you put away the whole fridge. That's not the future. The future has to be, how can I exchange the pump? As, by the way, we have done decades ago. Not everything has to be invented again. Then sometimes durability supported by self-repairing polymers is important for reuse. And then if it's for plastics, we should use thermoplastics and not thermosets, because thermosets we cannot remote. We can only mechanically cut down and then they are lost. So we have already here a very concrete principle of design. So if we lean back a little bit to allow for all this, also including recycling, also on a molecular level by metallurgy or depolymerization in case of plastics, which should not be the first rationale. It should be the last. First, we should keep form and content. But it shows design is very important. And this has to include all of it, not just synthesis and resources. So chemistry within a circular economy needs a design on a broader perspective. So here's some brief ideas. I will not go into details given time. How can we do this? One thing is we have to reduce complexity. Toxicity is well known, but as I have shown you, not very well advanced still. But also we have to reduce complexity. Else we will not be able to recycle good or to circulate. If we mix something on atomic, molecular, or product level, we have to separate. And separation needs a lot of energy, and much of this energy is lost, dissipative energy, and also materials are lost. Dissipation of metals and other elements, we call this from a physical point of view, entropy increases, thermodynamics. So we should avoid complex products if we design products and keep atomic molecular complexity at the lowest level and use as little number of components and avoid mixing. If you have a background in science theory, then I would say here Occam's razor, often forgotten and not taught. The most simplest solution is what we need, and it's the most elegant and the most scientific one. Nowadays, you can publish fancy papers in high impact journal if you have a very complicated synthesis or apparatus. And that's the incentive. The incentive is not to keep things simple. And this we have to change on all levels. The same holds for processes. Yeah, and also we have to have the broader picture. It's not just the individual molecule or material. Yeah, we have to avoid rebound effects. Often we have low carbon. Avoiding carbon dioxide emission means we have a high need in metals, which have to be mined and grinded, which is a very energy intensive process. And then sometimes there is chemistry involved using other liquid metals, which also they then have to mine, etc. And we have to reduce the total substance and material flows on a local, regional, and global level. Also within their diversity and size in terms of tonnage, but also in their dynamics. If you have an introduction of a new product and it's too fast, then recycling industry could not adapt and your product will never be recycled. So this also nicely demonstrates the importance of timescales and points in times we have to understand in the context of chemistry, but also in sustainability. They have to fit into each other. Or if you have a product on the market and you retract it, come up with a new, then you have to be aware, depends on what your product is, but normally it's around for another years or decades if you think of a building. But maybe at this time, nobody knows anymore what is in there, where it is, what is the quality, how to get, or maybe the technology is not available anymore, or it's not feasible in terms of economics. So we have to learn to be responsible to develop ownership of our product through its complete life cycle. Not only along the value chain. The value chain ends where there is no value anymore. But lifetime of products is longer. And this has to be our guideline. And if we want to recycle, we have to know where it is and how to get it, etc. So we need traceability, and we need more and better metrics to find out when is it greener. And by the way, we can only say it's greener. We cannot say it's green because we can only compare. Nature does not tell us here or giving us a measure. So we need metrics, and we have to change the chemical practices from bigger, faster, more complex into optimal, adapted, better, safer, and less complex. Simple example, recycling sounds good. So here's some typical data for collection. With paper, we are much better, but as I told you, with phones or electric equipment, we are much worse. 30% disassembling, especially if it's not disassembling, but just shredding and processing, we are much better. And chemistry, if we go for metals, for example, the metallurgy is very well established. But in the end, the weakest link determines what you get. The weakest step, 20% only. Now you may say, oh, we can improve. We can become more or less perfect. These are the data if we are more or less perfect. We are still losing 20%. And for all this, we need adapted infrastructures. We need proper legislation, intensives for true innovations, not only stepwise innovations. And we need a full cost assessment, and we have to introduce this broader thinking into education at all levels. For chemistry, it means we still need chemists, dedicated synthetic chemists, but at least they had a little bit an understanding of what is the bigger pictures, the bigger picture and the landscape they are in. So an interim summary, also to be important, there is no endless recycling. It's always a downgrading of quality by the processes, by mixing even steel. For example, we have about 600 grades of steel on the market, and the grade of steel is determined by the additives. The other metals or elements are in there. So often they are mixed, and then some of the specific quality is lost, and we have to add always new metals to get back to the original quality, or that we can dope it again. The same holds for plastics and any other material. And there is no upcycling. Sorry, for the chemists and the physicists, they know this, there's thermodynamics. If someone tells you there's an upcycling, then it's only maybe one cycle, and the waste, it's just postponed to another sphere or into the future. And not all chemicals and products can be circulated. Think of the contents, the ingredients of your shampoo, of your toothpaste, personal care products, the chemicals that sneak out, the additives from plastics, etc. For these who go into the environment, we are working on how to make them completely mineralizable, and preferably mineralizing by bacteria, because if it's by light, then it's often only a degradation, and follow-up products are formed of often unknown toxicity. Some we know are even more toxic. We have been able to show that's possible even for pharmaceuticals here. So nobody can tell it's not possible. Ionic liquids, solvents, and so on. And this broader, that by the way was the starting point for us to think about design, targeted design of products, but then also products for circular economy. Yeah, and then there are the 3 R's. I think these are clear. Reduce, something which you are not consuming, no need to care about, no resources need. And then try to reuse as long as possible for the same purpose or different purpose. By the way, that's nothing new. We have discussed this already 30 years ago. What a waste of time and opportunities. And then only go for recycling. And first you should keep form. For example, with the thermoplasts or other materials, metals, no remolding. Then keep material second. There we could do remolding for alloys, for metals, for plastics. If that's not possible, we should at least keep the composition. And if that's not possible, then we can go for depolymerization, for example, of plastics, or keep atoms if we separate the elements in the metals. And keep the atoms. The less good approach, or it's not at all a good approach, is keep energy, because that, in other words, is incineration, not only of all the valuable products, but all the energy which we have put in up here to get them is also lost. So a broader view, even broader view, would mean we should start from service and function. Because why do we need a chemical or use? Benzene, maybe you know from your school days, is a nice molecule, highly symmetric, very interesting in terms of bonding and theory. But I do not have at home 5 or 10 or 20 liters because it does not offer any functional service. I'll explain this you briefly in the last part. First of all, you're interested in, for example, protecting, that's another example, I come back later on. First of all, we are doing benign by design for silicones. Years ago, when we talked to companies that told us, it's not possible. Silicones have to be in a conditioner. Nowadays, you enter, at least in Germany, a drugstore, and you have shelf over shelf advertising no silicones. What a huge business opportunity. You have in there less material you have to pay for as a producer, but the price is still the same. Wow. The same with food, no artificial flavors. That should be the normal way. Why is it needed to advertise? That shows already how insane it is. Use patterns. An example from antibiotics. They define daily dosage. That's a standard scaling here. France is here. The daily dose per 1,000 population per day. You see here. And Netherlands, only half of it. I don't think that the French are more severe or more often infected by bacteria, for example, than the Netherlands, the Dutch. So it has to do with culture, and it has to do what we want to have, not what you need, but we want to have. Coming back to chemistry, if you are interested in a solvent, then you are in fact interested in the function it offers. The function to dissolve something, and then you want to get rid of it. Normally, you get rid of it as a waste. However, if you lease it, if you pay only for the usage, then the situation is a different one. Because then the colleague, like a car, the other company tells you if you give it back as clean as possible, you have to pay not so much. So you have a different incentive here. And you have a different talk between the two. It's not about win and lose, the one who wants to save as much as possible, and the other who wants to save as little as possible, pay as little as possible. Both now have the interest to use and to lose as little as possible. So we are here from increasing the sales volume as a business models towards a value-added approach. You pay for the functional unit. There are many examples out there. I just mentioned this here. For example, metal cleaning in the car industry. If you do not sell solvent, if you are paid by number of claimed objects, a reduction of 80% of use of solvent. Anti-corrosive treatment, another example here from Austrian colleagues. So chemistry for sustainability is about reducing and simplifying material and product flows, materials on all levels, including diversity. So the old model is chemistry is related to tonnage. It's a supply-driven model, product for value creation. The new model is about service. Service and functionality are the starting points, and then we design the whole system, including the chemicals. And that's for value creation. And that does not mean we do not need chemists in the future anymore. We need even more and better trains. That's the future. So the complete picture here, we can start with chemistry as a science. We had chemistry, green chemistry often called, in fact, it's greener chemistry. That's a normative framework only focused on how to synthesize with less waste and less energy. But it has not in mind circular economy and total substance flows and material flows. The biggest picture is chemistry for sustainability. I cannot go into details, but it's related to system thinking. Non-chemical design of systems is important. Alternative business models, doing with none or less chemicals. If we need chemicals, we should refer to think about that they fit into a circular economy and synthesized according to principles of green chemistry. And you see also, not everything which is greener is naturally suitable for circular economy, and not everything which is suitable for circular economy is more sustainable. Summarizing here, there are these famous laws of thermodynamics telling us you cannot win, you can only end up in a draw. And you can only up in a draw under perfect conditions. You will never reach perfect conditions. Sorry, guys. We can only lose or only decide to lose as little as possible. You may say, oh, that's theory. No, it's practice. For example, that you are aging is one of the manifestations of this. If your teacup falls to the ground and you try to put it together, you will see it's not possible to have it in exactly the same stage before. And to get close or closer to it, you need a lot of efforts, energy, and you create waste. So that's a sort of summary here. And that's also why there is no upcycling in the long run possible. Only in the short distance, short run. Yeah, that's the end of my lecture, and I want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Kümmerer, for this fantastic overview of the wider view of chemistry in the field of sustainability. I'm sure there are questions from the floor. Yes, go ahead.
Hello.
Perhaps you can just say your name or whatever.
Please speak loud that I can understand you.
Yes, and
Yes.
speak close to the microphones because the microphones are not always working well.
Hello, my name is Zoe. I'm a student of the Faculty of Geography, and I'm also interested in sustainability. I wanted to ask, because I really, every time I talk about this topic, I get really frustrated because I feel like, especially in Germany, I'm also from Germany, we have these big chemical companies. We have the big chemical companies on the one hand. We have a lot of companies that produce these products even more, that outsource the production of these products. And I feel that the whole dynamic of the capitalist and globalist market goes into the completely different direction. And I don't know, I feel that we have really weak instruments to really change this direction. I mean, we see it in recycling. You talked about it. For example, now that there's, I don't know, cutlery not out of plastic but out of wood, and now there's the market goes and invests in these products and creates even more of them, creating exactly what we want to avoid with our 3Rs.
I'm sorry, there is no need to be frustrated for several reasons. First of all, we can use the economics also to create incentives. Yeah, for example, the new business models, and more companies, also BASF is thinking about, some others are started already, because the incentive here is you need less material but get the same money. And if you know that material or raw products you also have to buy, that's a strong incentive. And we had a research project, for example, that was a SME, and they sell disinfectants. And we had a research project and said, what is important in a hospital? Is it important to use as much disinfectant as possible, or is it important to maintain a certain standard of hygiene? I think the answer is clear. It's about the standard of hygiene. If you have this view, then you see not in each time there is a disinfectant needed. Yeah, it's about training, it's about better construction, that you need less disinfectants, and so on. And now you may ask, and what is the advantage of the company? In this project, we asked the company to do the training, so to sell knowledge, because the company has all the knowledge, and that was well received by the medical doctors, because hygiene is not the favorite topic of the doctors. And it was someone from outside doing the training. So that was well received. And the company was paid not or made the revenue not by selling as much in terms of tonnage, but maintaining a standard of hygiene, which you can easily monitor. Yeah, so that was a nice experience for the company. And again, they also then noticed we need to buy less raw material, getting independent, a little bit more independent from the market there. Yeah, that is an advantage. And another one is, after the project, the person came up to me and said, if we would apply this model all over Germany, it was only in part of a hospital, it would save us a new building with filling stations. Wow, what a return of investment. An investment you do not have to do, but having the same revenue. And what about the hospital? They noticed, we need not an employee who is able to handle these dangerous compounds. We do not need the training. We can do what we are experts, medicine. And if something is going wrong, we are not blamed. It's the company. So a true win-win situation. Yeah. So that's one example. And if we give for the new products a prolonged patent lifetime, that's an intensive. On the other hand, I think, yes, we have to get rid of this order liberalism. The state has to set conditions. Yeah, we need a fence around the meadow, and in the meadow they can develop and try to find out best ways. But we have to define as society the meadow, and then they will do, I'm sure. So I'm quite optimistic. Also, as chemists, we have the knowledge.
Thanks. Another question from you? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very nice talk. I'm Benoît Pichon, I'm professor in material chemistry here in Strasbourg. So let's say just before you coming here, I was in another colloquium here also in Strasbourg, which is dedicated in advanced material. And there was a conference 2 days ago from Etienne Klein, so maybe you know him from CEA. And so he talked about innovation, you know. And so the first meaning of innovation is just continue keeping going on the way we do it, just to try to find new ways, but just keeping going on the business as usual. And so you mentioned the innovation. So I'm really wondering about the way we can innovate, go for this innovation in chemistry, and because it might not be the right way to do it to get a greener society, greener chemistry. And so my question is, I'm not sure you mentioned low technologies, and so what would be what's your idea about it? Would it be a solution, or to going down with technologies and go back to the basics?
Yeah. Yeah. Also, once again, referring to the last question, it's not without chemistry. I'm convinced without chemistry there will be not more sustainability. We need chemistry for more and better sustainability, but we need a different understanding, not in terms of what chemists normally are taught, how atoms and molecules behave, but how to use. So as long as you are in your research lab at the university, maybe you can do what you want. But if it's going outside, you're then in a different world. And if we say to our students, you have to come up with a patent, that drives innovation. But the question is, innovation for whom? And what, and why, and in which direction? And therefore, for this, we need not incremental innovations, we really need breakthrough, new types of innovations, and also new technologies. Maybe sometimes the new technologies are, you called it low, I would call it the more simple ones. Yeah. So it's easy to drive with a Ferrari, but maybe sometimes if you're too fast, you miss the next exit. Sometimes it's better to go by bicycle. And this we have to understand and to utilize. When is what appropriate? And not thinking about everything has to be commercialized at once. Or the, as I call it, the impactitis. You can, challenging, complicated things, it's, let's say, easy to publish in a good journal. Good in terms of mainstream, good in terms of impact factor. But if you come up with a more simpler solution, it's often challenging. But Occam's razor would tell you, and interestingly in math, it's if you go for a proof, if the most simplest one is the most elegant one. In chemistry, we have to better understand this and better teach this, and also maybe to get rid of this, as I call it, impactitis. So the point is not good or bad or low or high technology, it's about appropriate. And it's also about speed. As I mentioned, if we talk about speed of innovations, if it's too fast, then the recycling industry, for example, cannot adapt. If it's too short, it's the same. If it's too long, maybe also. And this we have to understand and taking into the consideration. So there is no simple solution, one fits all. I would call it, we need to get dirty fingers. We need more examples. These are all individual cases. I hope that helps a little bit to answer your question.
Thanks. Next question. Yes.
Hello, thank you for the very extensive presentation. I would like, Ioane Gruțiu from Lyon. I would like to ask you relatively two simple questions about chemical sobriety and chemical responsibility. For sobriety, would you have an idea how much can we reduce, globally speaking, of the chemical loads that are in circulation? And for the responsibility, I would like to understand whether we can, how should I say, eliminate, replace, and how fast or on what time scale toxic chemicals. In particular, considering that we know very little about the cocktail effects.
Yeah. The cocktail effects, I think, is a very strong argument that we have to reduce. As for the time being, it's challenging to come up with figures, but I would say you have seen this example with the silicones. That's only one. There are many more out there. I think, unfortunately, it will take a decade or even more, because Max Planck, for example, had said new ideas are not successful because the people that stick to the old ideas are convinced, but because they die out. I hope that it does not need a generation, but 10 years at least. That is one of the reasons why we also developed extra occupational study courses in this direction, to reach out to the people in industry already taking decisions. So I think depends also where you are. In our countries, I would say 30%, I would say at least. Yeah, and especially also we have now this chemical strategy of the European Union within the Green Deal, especially sustainable substitution by design. This we have to understand, not only substituting substance A by substance B, we have to understand it taking into consideration service and function first. I'll give you an example. We are insulating buildings. And Gwenaël, if you're in the audience, you know what I'm talking about. We are insulating building to save energy. And that means the facade is more often wet because the lower temperature on the surface, and then more often water is condensing. The result is algae and fungi are growing there. What we are doing is we are adding biocides. These biocides we now, several research groups found in the groundwater. So on the one hand, we are shifting a problem. On the other hand, I like to go into the Alps hiking, and maybe you also in Les Vosges, and there are also nice huts and houses, and we say, oh, nice, this facade with all this wooden surface and this nice gray color. But at home we say it has to be colorful, it has to be insulated. And I made a rough calculation back on the envelope, and it turned out that staying at home at 80 degrees Celsius and wearing a pullover like me here, instead of 23 degrees Celsius, saves more or less the same amount of carbon dioxide. And that's the way of thinking we have to put forward. And then we can save quite a lot, and this will automatically reduce. As for the material and substance flows, we have to think again more local and regional and not global. And maybe the crisis we have nowadays teaches people a lot what is on stake, also for economical point of view. But there's also a material one. Then we can better separate, we can better control what's in there and reduce and adapt. And again, there I would say, yeah, I think we can think back 30 years. Our living standard was not so low, but the turnover also in material was maybe 30% compared to nowadays. So that gives you maybe a figure. We are not talking about incremental opportunity of 5 or 3%. There's much more out.
Thank you. More questions from the floor? You have one, Matthias.
It's switched on. Matthias Wantzen, UNESCO Chair for River Culture. I will put it off so you can read my lips. We have, I think, from a biologist's point of view, I see that there is a big discrepancy between what is currently done in the chemical industry and principles that we can see from chemical processes in nature. Mainly two. One is energy cascades. ecology, like economy, is very economic. Oikos is the talking about the budget or the household. We see in microbial processes, in respiration processes, we see that tiniest energy differences are used in cascades, and I don't see this in the chemical industry. And the second point is about compartments. We in chemical processes or processing, we see that we have huge enterprises, we have huge reactors and so on that are very resistant to innovation. It is such a high investment into one production chain that even if we know we can do it better, it takes ages until this investment has been compensated. So my question to you is, as you know the chemical industry well, are there any tendencies to go towards a kind of leaner energy-saving production with smaller interactive production units?
Yeah, there are different aspects. This has been done within the recent 20, 30 years for already in chemical industry, or since the very beginning, because the very beginning energy was also very scarce, if you think coal and before this. So within production, that's already quite good done. And for example, the German chemical industry, they reduced energy consumption in the last 30 years, I think, by at least a factor of 2. And at the same time, they produced much more. Mm-hmm. So that's often, how should I say, konterkariert. That's a sort of rebound effect, because it's cheaper, because you need less energy, you have to pay less, you produce more. Yeah, so in the end, you are more effective within the process, but the total outcome is even worse, a typical rebound effect. Else, I do agree with the energy cascade. Also, nature has only for the big materials, for the huge amount materials, I would say, think of cellulose, think of proteins, and then we have the fats. And then you see only very limited number of building blocks. Yeah, so that's we have already a simplified, let's say, a toolbox of building blocks. Yes, we can learn from nature, but again, we have to avoid things like if people say, yes, we have nature is just the English word in German it would be verschwenderisch. But as far as I have understood biology, it's
wasteful.
Not
wasteful.
Yeah.
Wasteful.
As far as I have understood, like a cherry tree, yes, there are a lot of flowering, but only to make sure that the next generation will be there, and not more. Yeah. On the other hand, if we are trying to be too effective, then we have to invest much more energy, and we will lose lots of material. For example, in the electronic materials, the rare earth metals are in very low concentrations there. And probably, therefore, we will never be able, or only at high expense, to recycle. So this, we have to better understand. Biotechnology is a huge opportunity. But again, it's not for free. You are in the water phase, and that means you need a lot of energy to get out your products. So I just try to say, yes, we can, but again, we need a closer look.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we need to move on. Thank you very much again for this talk and this nice discussion. So stay with us. You stay with us online. And we will now move on to the second keynote speaker, who was also the last person who asked a question, Professor Matthias Wantzen. He's also co-chair of the session, so I better make a good job in presenting him. So Matthias has the UNESCO Chair River Culture, Fleuves Patrimoine, CNRS UMR Citeres at University of Tours, and he's currently visiting scientist for CNRS at University of Strasbourg. So if Professor Kümmerer told us about fluxes of matter, I think Matthias will tell us about fluxes of water, and more specifically about river management. So I think from his abstract, he will tell us about the importance of principles often ignored in understanding water systems and river systems, and also the obstacles that are not taken into account so far. So Matthias, I look forward to discover your vision on sustainable river systems. Your talk is entitled River Cultures, Learning Sustainability from Naturally Flowing Rivers. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much for introducing me and for inviting me to speak here on this splendid audience. I would like to draw your attention to principles that we can learn from rivers for sustainability. The entire meeting here is about maybe better defining sustainability. And this way, yeah, okay. So rivers are symbols of permanent change and permanent selection. The water runs from the mountains down to the sea and transports sediments, but this is only part of the story. There is also an exchange in the other direction, and I will come to that later on when I talk. There is a permanent change of the physical setting, and this destruction by erosion and construction of landscape by sedimentation enables the development of the different successional stages in a very limited space, which means we have an area which is just a sandbar, then we have an area just next to it which is already covered by grasses, the other one by willows, and finally by higher trees, and then comes the next erosion event, tears it down, and we have new channels that start this eternal life cycle again. And in the Andean philosophy, the Pachamama, which is gaining much attention currently in ecology and in socio-ecology, this permanent turnover is a very important element. And for me, as a biologist with a strong background in evolution research, this is also a permanent selective force for adaptations. You are living in a permanently changing environment, so you must be permanently adapting. Apart from this downstream movement, all water bodies are pulsating. Like a breathing movement, the water level goes up and down in different rhythms, being it daily in marine systems or annually or biannually in larger river systems, or just in many more, in longer cycles in groundwater systems. So this is here on the left side, the 100-year record of the Amazon at Manaus. As you can see here, 12 meters or up to 15 meters water level fluctuation. Nobody ever talks about a catastrophe of inundation. Rather, we have this pulsing hydrology at the beginning of the dynamic habitats I have just been talking about, and the offer of resources like fish yield or plants that are produced in the floodplain. And these variable offers of resources create windows of opportunity where organisms can use something. If you make a balance of energy use or biological processes in general in floodplains, you will see that they are never linear. There are hot spots and hot moments when all this energy uptake, for example, consumption of mayflies that are eaten up by fish is taking place. On the other hand, we have windows of susceptibility, which means risks. And strategies always also have to be developed to avoid these risks. So the use and the resource use and the risk avoidance strategies together shape strategies that we could call biological species by species traits, or if we look at the human aspects we talk about cultural diversity. For me, it's very important that we can really compare biological species traits at one hand and human adaptive traits as cultural traits on the other. And You see here some examples. So on the left hand, you see the biological part here, a newly described millipede species from the Pantanal. We just discovered at this scientific event here. These animals have a brain that is smaller than the tip of a needle pin, but they are able to sense the arrival of the next flood wave, and then they climb up the trees. Our hydrologists, with the best computers available, are not as precise as these little bugs. On the lower, you see ants in the Loire floodplain, which know when the water will come, and they do not go up, they go down. And they build houses that are waterproof by making marvelous use of iron minerals. On the other hand, we have here an example which all of you know that are living in the Strasbourg region. Vitis vinifera is the wine plant, is originally coming from floodplains and has been distributed all along the river valleys already 5,000 years ago. Agriculture has been developed in floodplains and has spread from there. And of course, the out of Africa, the hominid migration, did not take place in the deserts where we find the bones today, but rather along riverscapes. Resulting from analysis of biodiversity and also on genetic analysis, we can say that these interactions between changing aquatic and terrestrial environments foster the development of diversity, different strategies. And there from the floodplain, these strategies go traveling. They travel up and down the river. They can be carried from one place to another. If we take the cultural example, and for example, the Dutch culture coming up the Rhine, Erasmus from Rotterdam, who has lived partially here in the region, or vice versa, the stems of the trees from the Vosges and the Black Forest Mountains that are the basis of Rotterdam or Amsterdam, parts of the city, and the people that came down with these rafts that brought the culture from here, the region, to the down lower part of the Rhine. So what are now the principles of sustainability that we can learn from the river? I try to simplify and summarize them to three. The first is the principle of dynamic equilibria and patch dynamics. As I already explained, the river constructs and destroys, and in between we have this patchwork of differently aged successional system stages. And this dynamic is a training program for resilience. All the organisms are permanently challenged to adapt to these changes. And what we consider a catastrophe is nothing else than a rejuvenation process. And this presence of different sequential stages increases diversity. We can have many different organisms that have totally different strategies, and they can live very closely together. The important point here is that the event is not a real catastrophe. It does not eliminate the entire organisms, which means it does not overcome the physiological limits of these organisms. Of course, in human terms, the flood events that we just encountered in this summer, they went far beyond this carrying capacity. We see this adaptation to dynamic equilibria in traditional communities. Yanomami natives, for example, they burn their huts every 7 years. And this insect that you see here on the lower part, Triatoma infestans, is a reason for it. So by their houses are more and more infested with these blood-sucking insects that are transmitting Chagas disease, which is lethal. So the people prefer to burn their house and then colonize anew. We have at the same time this change between territory and, I would say, waterscape in floodplains, which means that during the dry season we have territory, land space, which has then defined borders and where people are doing agriculture or ranching. and during the flood period, the fishermen are using the same space, and they are distributing goods in a common way. That is very interesting to have this alternating change between possession and non-possession. And these adaptations to dynamic equilibria can give examples how we could live sustainable in the future by regarding what has been successful in the past. Of course, without any romanticism to old traditional people. If we ignore this principle, we reach, at least in river management, what I call the hydrosystem syndrome, which means that the previously dynamic water bodies are now stilled, just serving as a mirror for architecture, or they are polluted or even completely buried, like many streams in the cities that have disappeared, and you can only read their names on the roads. This purely physical effect is not the only one. We have not only this physical manifestations like increased imperviousness, but we have a large range of other problems that occur in cities, especially in the cities of the global south that are currently growing very fast. The most important problem, according to our analysis from 12 different countries, is the synchronicity of the stressors that we have had time to combat one by one. So pollution of water in the Rhine dates back to the earliest days of the BASF, when the Rhine turned gray or green or blue, according to the aniline colors that they were producing there in the beginning of the 20th century. And today we have very nice wastewater treatment plants. We can deal with these problems. We had later other problems and we could deal with them. And all these problems are now occurring at the same time in tropical countries or in developing countries, which hampers their solution. We have, of course, also governance problems and so on. So this is an example for ignoring this principle of dynamic system. It is rather trying to still nature and their processes. Another effect is the well-known or sadly known problems with floods and droughts that we are more and more encountering in Central Europe and all over the world. We just have eliminated more than 90% of the floodplains, which could serve as a buffer for hydrological mega events like these floods, but also which would deliver water during longer periods of droughts. And floods and droughts are ugly brothers or sisters, because we try to get rid of the water as fast as possible by sealing surfaces, by channelizing rivers, and in the end we have a lack of water, or even here in the Upper Rhine Valley, as we recently learned from studies here from the groundwater people. So if we learn from this principle, we could say dilapidation is possible. We can do these changes, we can adapt our environment according to the environmental needs and challenges. So a famous example, of course, in France is Haussmann and the reconstruction of Paris. We should consider reconstructing our entire landscapes and cities according to climate change, to global needs. We should definitely abandon areas that are under high risk of flooding, and we must abandon certain areas, and we must abandon certain agricultural techniques that are absolutely incompatible with the current environmental setting, like ranching, for example, in drylands, which destroys a lot of vegetation and does not yield many kilograms of meat. And it is possible, here an example on the right side from Curitiba in Brazil, where a slum has been removed from the riverbanks. This happens very often, but in this case, the people were compensated. They got houses nearby, so they wouldn't spend hours of their work time in the bus to get to their working places, and they actually liked it. And some of the people could, on rocky grounds, could stay there, and they are now working in the parks that are developed at this area. So it is socially feasible to do these changes without having a dictatorship. And of course, a very strong driver for this principle is climate change. Reinsurers do not want to pay anymore for too elevated risks. And this means that there is a pressure on policies, there is a pressure on real estate prices in these high-risk areas, which are a chance for adapting our urban and landscape planning and urban landscape management towards a more environmental friendly and resilient strategy. Principle number 2 is rhythm. These hydrological changes occur in a way that everybody can recognize. We have snow melt in spring, and so the water level goes up, and we have dry phases in late summer, so the water level goes down. And I dared to compare this principal theme that you can easily recognize, which is permanently varied because there are no two identical years, one following another, with music. So if you listen to Bach's Goldberg variations, for example, you can recognize the theme, and there is a variation in between, so the music will not get boring. This is very similar to the natural rhythm. You recognize the general pattern, but you have a variation every year. And as I told you before, we have the opportunity to have a high diversity of different strategies in parallel, because these extreme events will not eradicate them, but rather they can survive there. So this is what I call a sequential biodiversity. In one year, a certain set of strategies or a set of species can do it better than the others, and in the following year, another group has a better chance to perform. And this living in the rhythm is absolutely possible. Here on the left, you see Leticia in Colombia, 10 meters water level fluctuations, absolutely no problem because the houses are swimming. And on the right, Munich in Germany, Isar after restoration, the extreme events are blocked by a Sylvenstein reservoir. So it is not pure nature, but it is a kind of domesticated nature that still can perform in an hydrological rhythm. So during this extreme flood event, I just 2 minutes later, I took this photograph here of the children walking along the river safely. Yeah? So enjoying this natural event. So this is possible. If we ignore this principle of natural rhythms and of this fact that we are a biological species, an animal, we are animals, we have certain species requirements. If we are talking about cattle raising or chicken or pork, we are keeping the species in species appropriate environment, but the humans are not kept in this species appropriate environment. We do not actually need strawberries in wintertime. We do not need necessarily change night into day. And we encounter more and more human diseases that are driven by these severe mistakes that we are doing with the environmental changes. Klaus Kümmerer just talked about the huge amount of chemical substances that are coming and the number of allergies or of psychological misbehaviors that are permanently increasing, which are a result of this unadapted way of life that we are leading. And we can learn from these principles by living in a rhythm with a hydro calendar, cultural events that are streamlined with seasons, with sharing of common goods, which we could learn from people that are living in river floodplains and from time to time just lose their territory, then gain it again in the next dry season. And of course, to avoid risky constructions in floodplains. A driver for this second principle might be the One Health approach. You all know the mens sana in corpore sano, a good spirit in a good body, and a healthy humanity in a healthy planet. This concept is gaining strength now in the context of zoonosis, but I would really like to widen it up to the entire healthy planet in terms of functional ecosystems. And the third principle is what I call pseudo-redundancy. If you look at the food webs here, you have very complicated scheme of a food web. Don't look to the details. Just you see here that we have similar organisms, or in functional terms, very many similar species that do almost the same, but not exactly the same. So if one of them fails, another one can replace it, and this in the end improves the stability of the system and its resilience against massive changes. However, some species are more important for the overall ecosystem functioning than others, and these are those that we need to conserve with specific efforts. If we ignore this principle, we might eliminate the central pillar of our temple, and then the whole thing will break to a lower level of organization. That is what we currently encounter in marine ecosystems with the so-called rise of the slimes. So we replace fish as end of the food web by jellyfish, by meduses, by the invertebrates that fulfill the job as a top predator, because we have fished out and we have destroyed the survival conditions for teleost fish. And we have created new rules in evolution. We have provided a new system that eliminates strategies that were successful for millennia and millions of years. Take alone the amphibians that are quite incompatible with our dry, hot asphalt surfaces. On the other hand, we have created space for species that are now considered to be invasive because they are opportunists that can survive better, while others, like long-distance migrators, are systematically ruled out. Just the larger fish species that are migrating on the northern hemisphere, their populations since 1970 have gone down by 97%, which means there are 3% of the fish populations left of all salmon, sturgeons, and other larger migrators. Since 1970. In 1970, you didn't have a single sturgeon or salmon or whatsoever big migrator in the Rhine. So this is already a very bad starting point. So to learn from this principle, we can create resilience through pseudo-redundant strategies. For the construction of what we call human river encounter sites, or newly managed urban riverbanks and also lake banks, we have delivered some elements that need to be considered, like habitat for all, not only humans, but also for animals and plants, health for humans and non-humans, safety, ecosystem functions, create a space to learn and admire, a kind of environmental education that comes by itself, just by fascination, just by regarding, just by sitting on the riverbank and seeing how it calms me down, how fascinating it is to observe an animal or so. To be more collaborative and participative, and to create an eco-social fairness, rather than all these riverfronts that are only available for the well-to-do people, and creating resilience against higher risks. A driver for this principle can also be the ecosystem services concept. And I here would like to reinforce what Klaus Kümmerer just said, that nature doesn't have an interest. And nature doesn't have an interest to serve us. Nature is nature, and it functions because it is possible. But we interpret some of the ecosystem functions as a service for the holy humanity. And these are here these ecosystem services, and it is a social decision process that decides if we consider this as valuable or not. If we change, say, from cherry production to wheat, the bees and their fertilizing effect for the plants is not necessary anymore, so the bees can go. So that is why I'm quite critical against this concept. But here are some of these functions that can be interpreted as ecosystem services that are delivered by rivers. You all know them. We just summarized the recent state of the art in a chapter for the Encyclopedia of Inland Waters. The problem is, we all know that. We scientists all know that. We tell the community, the society, nobody listens. This is old stuff. This is actually in the Greek tragedies by Sophocles, like Oedipus or Antigone. You know, the sage who tells the hero the truth, his name is Tiresias. And the problem, our Tiresias dilemma, comes from inadequate communication. That is what Klaus Kümmerer just mentioned as impactitis. I like this word really very much. The complexity of the problem that we know as ecologists or socio-ecologists versus the need by the decision takers for simple solutions, and vice versa. We, the scientists, natural scientists specifically, hardly ever know the complexity of social systems and the decision-taking process. We think that if we have a bright idea, everybody will buy it and will act according to it. Immanuel Kant described it very nicely with his categorical imperative, but actually most of our decisions are taken not with a brain. The ignorance can also be an activity, and we see a lot of people that just do not want to know about this unpleasant truth. We have single-sided interests, chronism, nepotism, corruption, voila. And trying to fight against this can be the creation of what I call a psychology of care. There is an ethics of care, so it means that I do not only care about another human person, but I also care for things, or I care for systems, and why not care for ecosystems? Feel that we are part of this nature. Take, for instance, this Pachamama picture from one of the first slides, that you feel integrated in it, to visualize a target and then to create a narrative how to get there. And finally, to identify with this goal, to say, this is my river, this is my city, this is my ecosystem, and then take action. And we have recently done this exercise worldwide with 32 case studies in the River Culture book. I will talk about this very soon. In the River Culture concept, we summarized these elements in 5 different tenets. One is, you know it already, floods are not a disaster, and we should make use of this flood pulse advantage and not to fight against it. Better quality of life through a healthier nature by adapting human life again to the rhythm of nature. The third is learning from long-term experience from people, traditional ecological knowledge, but without any romanticism. What is old is not automatically good, and what has been sustainable 200 years ago is not necessarily sustainable today. The fourth point is what I call ecosystem scale bionics, which means to summarize all the different strategies that we can observe in nature and use it as an inspiration for innovation. Think about the millipedes that climb up the trees. So find better ways how to predict environmental changes and learn from nature to adapt to the future. And finally, this is a very political statement, what I call bassin de responsabilité, a cooperation between people all over the catchment. So make the catchment border really the baseline for territorial policies. Not only for the Agence de l'eau, who do that already in France, but also for the entire territorial policies like agriculture, like energy, like transport, and so on, because here we have a very good indicator, because the river integrates all the good and bad things that we are doing. We have a very deep political consequence out of this with the trans-basin transfer of water, which is currently taking place in Russia, in Africa, and in India alone in 16 processes, in China, and so on. So here come the results from this river culture studies from all over the world. We often have very similar drivers, but different dynamics of deterioration of the river culture, of these human-river linkages. The tipping points are approaching very fast. We have an intergenerational and cultural disruption, so we need to rediscover this. Museums are very important, environmental education is very important here, and this sense of place, that the people really feel I'm here from this area, and I'm proud that we can go bathing next to our river. There is no return to good old times, as I said already. We need a lot of translational research, how to transform a traditional sustainable use form to be adapted to our modern societal system, but also to our economic system. Very often these traditional techniques are just economically unfeasible, and climate change can be an efficient driver for action. So to summarize my talk, principle number 1, dynamic equilibria and patch dynamics. We need to accept that permanent change is elementary to all living systems. We need to accept these natural rhythms, our existence as a biological species that has certain needs, and that is actually well adapted to changes, but we have to integrate them again to our lives. The diversity resulting from this pseudo-redundancy, and finally, Mother Nature has so much experience in research and development, so we should really look who has already done these adaptations in the past 3.5 billion years. And I have some questions for the later debate. My first is, how can we make people to take action timely, facing these very fast approaching tipping points? Monsieur Boeuf, the chef of the Musée National d'Histoire Naturelle, has said, la marge de manœuvre, the action, our action breadth is shrinking every day. And so we must act faster before we are being urged to take action, and then we have no choice anymore. So we must use our liberty of choice to adapt to future trends. And the other one is, how wild can or do we want to get cities and open landscapes? I call this degré de sauvagitude. How wild can we get? How much nature do we want to have? We are already talking about ecosystem disservices. So if beavers, for example, are now spreading, are cutting trees in public parks, or mosquitoes are coming back to the Upper Rhine Valley after restoring floodplains, this is a kind of societal discussion which needs to be fostered. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Matthias, for this inspiring talk. I'm sure there are lots of questions from the floor. Otherwise, we can start answering those that you asked. But no questions? No questions online? I have a comment. I couldn't help notice that you talk about nature, and then you mention the fact that nature has no lessons to give us, or at the same time, and then you talk about river culture. And as you know, I mean, especially in France, this nature-culture divide is no longer really, the lens to look at it. So I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit. If if this return of wildness that you are asking about, is this not a cultural thing rather than a natural thing, for example?
I did not say that nature has nothing to teach us. I said the processes that are occurring in nature, they are not driven by a purpose, and it is us to learn from nature or not to learn from nature. And the best thing is that we see these natural processes as an example of how we could restructure or redesign our processes or our lifestyle. For example, by using these energy cascades rather than spoiling as many resources as possible. And we really have to understand the how to call it, that the resources are limited, and if we construct more and more houses every day, if you go to the deuxième, troisième, quatrième, énième couronne that are developing around the cities at the moment with single houses, each one wasting 500 square meters for one family, and then the children start studying, doing exactly the same, and then the parents stay there for another 30, 40 years in this house. This is not sustainable. And if we learn that in nature we do not only have a construction, but we also have a deconstruction or a reconstruction of space, and of that all the resources are recycled, then we can integrate this better into our lives. And I think this is very important. And in chemistry, that's what we learned in the previous talk, there are certain substances that are then so widely dispersed by entropy that we have great difficulties in recycling them. So we must be more economic with using these reserves. And the remark that I made in the morning with the different definitions of sustainability in the economic world and in ecology, I think it's very important. So if we do not find enough manganese anymore on the land, we go drilling or we go collecting manganese bulbs on the seafloor and destroy the entire ecosystem there. And this is just something that should be more or less automatically prohibited by using the common sense. That is what I mean. That is what I meant. I think there is no contradiction with the statement that we have currently this nature culture. How to say, this is currently gathering, but still I see this in many debates in France, when the word homme is written with a majuscule in capital spelling, like God. Yeah, so the needs of the human species are still considered to be more important than the needs of any other species, because we have this. We are the representative of God on this planet, and we see that by behaving this way, we are sending ourselves to hell. And I think this is a very important thing, that we really take more responsibility for our actions.
Thank you for clarifying. I think Elisabeth has a question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for your very interesting talk. You mentioned at the end of your presentation, you asked a very good question for me, which is why nobody listens. And you try to answer by different aspects, one being ignorance as an activity. Mm-hmm. Do you mean junk science when saying junk science, false science? False science, because this is a real issue. We know that now we are facing, as researchers and academics in public institutions, the rise of ignorance and junk science. And this is a real issue because policymakers And even judges will use the fact that there is controversies, that there is uncertainties, to say, okay, states cannot act, so inactivities are being justified by the fact that we lack scientific certainties. So what would you suggest?
We have actually our scientific debate culture is an open breach for this fake news attack. I'm started my career the first 10 years at the Max Planck Society, and you were presenting your data, and there were 50 people in the audience that did nothing else than ripping off anything from your construct that would not be very solidly underlined with data. Yeah, and this improves science, of course. This strengthens the statements that you make, but we overlook that with this culture we are completely open for attacks by people that are just lying, that have no arguments, and that rather abuse this situation. This is one point. Another point is that this is from the scientific aspect. From the political aspect, it is like it is so easy to manipulate people, and we have an open democratic system. You can get informed, but what we see at the moment with procedures like the Brexit, for example, with the many protest movements, that the large majority of people just does not vote. They are too lazy, and they do not get involved, whereas the people that have a certain belief in something, they are politically more active. And this is a great problem in our current democracy. And the third point, I would say, is a statement made by President Jair Bolsonaro, the Brazilian president, during the corona crisis. He did not realize that his microphone was still open and he was still filmed, and you can see that on YouTube. He said to the Ministry of Environment, "Listen, now that all the people are occupied with corona, we can go on like hell with deforestation in Amazonia. People are too occupied, they won't go to court, they will not attack us, and the world is not watching." During the football championship in Argentina, the dictator at this time put political enemies in airplanes, flew over the Atlantic and dropped them from 200 meters height, killing them all. Which means that we are attentive to flashy news, and then we do not see the whole thing. What we need is a more intensive participation by all the members of the voting community. And I think this is very, very important. And so this ignorance as an activity, it has different aspects. But the most important is, in my view, that it is currently possible to say something without having any truth underneath, and still people would believe it because just they don't care for the truth.
Please.
Thank you very much for this very, very interesting presentation. I had one question, or kind of a remark, comment for your own questions. When you ask how wild can we and do we want to get in cities and open landscapes, I can't stop thinking that at some point there was a reason why we arrived here. I mean, controlled river, no beaver, no top predators in Europe globally, or in Western Europe. So my question is rather, if we decide as scientific that for sustainability reasons, or we need to rewild, and that is still under review. I mean, it's not for certainty, but how do we convince population that they will have to let go some comfort? They will, well, we will have to live with top predators, we will have to live with beavers, we will have to live with flood, and all of these different aspects of life are completely forgotten in I think for a global population. So I think you gave some answers during your presentation with the visualization and the, well, I would say a romanticism around some natural phenomena. But in my small experience, I fear that it might not be enough, and I wonder if really do we have to ask these questions. What if the very first question is, do we collectively, with everybody, want to get there? Thank you.
In decision taking has different aspects. There's this famous Arnstein letter of 1969, which has a very active individuum at one side, so to say, a kind of bottom-up approach, and on the other hand, you have a very strong government, and the individual citizen has practically no power, as you have it, for example, in China at the moment, where the government takes most of the decisions, although there are very nice exceptions. The question is, where are the people on this, between these two extremes, and how can we push them into action? I'm currently collaborating with the Dutch sociologist Dries Heggers, who is working on how can we convince people to give up their houses because sea level rise will chase them out anyway. And it is very interesting to see how step by step a social relationship with this Tiresias, with this warning person, can be established. So Rijkswaterstaat, which is the Dutch institution responsible for this, they really go from door to door and talk with the people. Not once, they talk several times. And it works. We have another example. ETH Zurich researcher Gret Regamé has built dreams. How does she do that? She takes hydrological models, she takes interviews, and she takes urban planning, puts it all together into her magic computer, and then she presses the print button for a 3D printer. And then she invites the people that are living in a flood-prone valley in Jakarta, in Indonesia, and see, so that's more or less what will come out if we do what you wish according to your sayings. And then the people say, oh, maybe it's not exactly that what I want. And then they say, couldn't we change this here and this there? We are very visual people. So if you can, the better you can visualize perspectives, the better you can do it. We are currently planning a larger project where we want to re-establish wilderness corridors in different countries. And this is based on the reduction of necessary agricultural areas under the hypothesis that people would eat less meat. And here we are already anticipating a lot of fear by the people that are afraid of wolves, or that are afraid that they wouldn't get from A to B because their former road will now be interrupted by a green corridor, and so on. So it is really very important. Two things. First is, where are the people between the totally free citizen that just needs some money from the government to perform, and on the other hand, the suppressed citizen that doesn't take any action by himself. And the next one is this construction of trust, what we call social engineering. If I, as a strange person, come to you and say, you have to change your life entirely, you have to do this, you must not do this and this and this anymore, you won't trust me. But if you know me, and you know that I really want that something good will happen to you, or something bad will be avoided, if this trust exists, then you will take it. And I'm absolutely admiring the relationship that, for example, the scientific community in Lyon has created with the authorities that are responsible for the management of the Loire. They're organizing every 2 to 3 years a conference, IS Rivers. And I talked to one of the elder statesmen of the scientific community, Pierre Marmonnier, and said, how did you get this intimate relationship with the decision takers, with the stakeholders, and with the élus, with the politicians? And he said, it took ages, and it took hectoliters of coffee, or if needed, also a glass of wine, to establish this relationship. And I think this is something that we scientists, that we are so Kantianists, yeah, that we believe in this. If I have the better argument, you will all automatically follow me. This is completely wrong. We really have to build up trust. And I think this is a very important step towards the bridging the science policy gap.
Thank you very much. So I think in the interest of time, we need to move on to the third and speaker and the last before the coffee break. So thanks again. So our speaker is Dr. Melis Aras from the laboratory SAGE, which also translates in English as Societies, Actors, and Government in Europe. So Dr. Aras holds a PhD in environmental law, and perhaps one way to present it, at least that's how I will do it, is for her topic is the search of what environmental sustainability could or should involve from a legal perspective in terms of implementing the use of renewable energy sources and accompanying the energy transition. So Melis, your title is Environmental Sustainability and the Energy Transition in Search of a Framework for Achieving Renewable and Sustainable Energy Transition. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon. I am very pleased to be part of this first FERED Symposium, and thank you to all organizers, to all members of the Federation. My name is Melis Aras. I am a legal scholar in environmental law, and since 2019 I've been working as a postdoctoral researcher at the SAGE laboratory of the University of Strasbourg. And today I will try to contribute to the understanding of the concept of sustainability through its consideration in the field of the renewable energy law. And to do so, I will first of all briefly point out the link between the sustainable development and the energy transition. I will then outline some critical approaches to the sustainable development concept, and from which I will frame my research questions. And finally, I will introduce some research results in order to open up a discussion. So the objective of sustainability is initially based on the recognition of an ethical and ecological limit to development, as we can see this first vision in these international documents and conferences. So it refers to an integrated approach, an integrated principle of nature conservation in the planning of economic development. But in legal and political terms, this objective is understood today, and in particular through this sustainable development concept, as an objective of balance and conciliation between economic, social, and environmental concerns. And this vision also prevails in French legal framework, and we have the French Charter for the Environment in its Article 6 mentioned this objective of sustainable development, and this charter has a constitutional value. Regarding the energy transition, is basically it it is based on the sobriety, efficiency, as well as on the development of renewable energy sources. And the energy transition is also considered as a key element contributing to the objective of sustainable development. We can see this consideration both at supranational and national levels. And for example, in French framework, and in particular in several sectorial regulations, the use of renewables is a criterion, is a standard for promoting sustainable development in urban planning and building projects. However, there is also an increasing opposition to the renewable energy technologies, and this is because of their impacts on various interests, like impacts on species and biotopes, flora and fauna, or landscapes, or biodiversity, etc. In fact, this fact underlines that the sustainable development is inoperative when faced with these negative externalities of the energy transition. And in line with this, in literature, we have several approaches criticizing this anthropocentric vision of the sustainable development concept. Sustainable development is perceived as a rhetorical arrangement of development, and in the same direction, the energy transition is considered as an addition of one technology to another, and this reason provokes some political and scientific controversies, as in particular around the concept of the Anthropocene. And according to the theory of world risk society, global risks exhibit three characteristic features. They are spatially, temporarily, and socially delocalized. Their causes and consequences are not limited to one geographic area, and their consequences are non-compensable. In this regard, the sustainable development concept needs to be reviewed in order to deal with this global risk, considering this characteristic. Deep ecology has also emerged as an alternative proposal to the ecological thinking and to the superficial ecological thinking, and this interpretation of ecology suggests to overcome the utilitarian and opportunistic vision of environmental protection. In fact, this vision we have in this sustainable development concept also, and deep ecology suggests to protect nature for its intrinsic value, for its own value. Regarding the socio-technical transition approach, technological innovations like, for example, renewable energy technologies are not sufficient to overcome the challenges in the environmental, economic, and social dimensions of sustainable development. So a system innovation is required from a sustainability perspective. And we can also add on this list many other approaches which criticize the sustainable development concept, like planetary boundaries as developed yesterday and today also. And we can say also, although there are some academic works on renewable energy sustainability criteria, sustainability indicators, most confirms that ecosystems and biodiversity remain much more difficult to assess, to measure in environmental assessments. So as a result, I have two main questions. To what extent is sustainability being taken into account in renewable energy related legal framework and how to go beyond that vision. Through these questions, I would like to demonstrate the availability of legal mechanisms related to this sustainability concept, and this is in particular in the renewable energy law. And to do so, I will rely on traditional legal methodology based on textual and case law analysis. And I also decided to consider the sustainability issue according to the life cycle thinking, but in a really general way. So from raw material extraction to the end of life. And now I would like to introduce 5 main results. And first of all, regarding the industrial production processes, in French legal framework, there are no mandatory regulations requiring information on the ecological impact of these materials used for renewable technologies. And we can also say that there is no environmental or ecological label that will be applicable to the renewable energy projects. However, we have some local initiatives like this Saint-Romain-en-Galles solar power plant project. This project has been labeled as a positive biodiversity project by local authorities, and the main input of this project consists of the reconversion of an industrial waste dump into a solar power plant, and the development of renewable energy sources on this formal industrial area is also considered as an important contribution to the sustainable development on this local area. But in this project, in its non-technical summary or in other documents accessible, we cannot see the information, we cannot find the information on the production or extraction processes of materials used. So we can say this scientifically, this project, the presentation of this project is incomplete to assess this ecological impact, but at the same time, we can also say that this local initiative shows us a bottom-up commitment, a bottom-up effort to ensure and assume an ecological vision within this energy transition. Regarding the planning and authorization phases of renewable energy projects, again in French legal framework, we have several legal provisions focusing on the environmental, landscape and biodiversity impact of the projects, and more concretely under the European Habitat Directive and the relevant articles of the French Environment Code, we can also some areas which are strictly protected from any construction projects, including renewable energy projects, and this comes from their ecological, natural value interests. But there is also, under the same regulation, there is also a derogation regime. This derogation regime is applicable when some criteria, when some conditions are cumulatively presented. For example, if we have another interest to protect, like public health or public safety, or another interest like electricity supply, we can apply this derogation regime. And we can also say that this derogation regime could be interpreted as an application of the principle of conciliation resulting from this sustainable development objective. But this derogation regime is perceived as highly controversial by environmental protection associations and is being challenging in the renewable energy project litigations. And to be concrete, we have this wind farm project in the forest of Lanouet in Brittany. This project has benefited from this derogation regime, and for the local residents, this project is an ecological disaster. But for the French Council of State, the realization of a wind farm, so this wind farm, allowing the supply of electricity to more than 50,000 people, responds to an imperative reason of overriding public interest. So, to a very important public interest. And in its decision, the Council of State considers in particular the fragile character of electricity supply in this region, and considers also this renewable energy production by this project as a solution, as a response to this local need. Regarding the operation phases, so during lifetime and also recycling processes, in fact we have no real developments on these two areas, and this will be very quick. And firstly, regarding the operation phases during lifetime, we can say that anthropocentric interests are more prevalent than ecocentric ones. So anthropocentric interests, like for example visual or acoustic damages, depending on the presence of renewable energy technologies, installations in proximity of the property. And this is also because of the strong dependence between the legal capacity to act and the prejudice, and this makes the access to justice quite complex. And regarding also this recycling process, in the legal framework, the French legal framework is still incomplete to cover all renewable energy sources. We have for the moment only this recycling of waste electrical and electronic equipment which is provided, but we have also some political recent developments, and this is in particular in the wind energy sector, so in particular regarding all these onshore energy sources. And as we can see, we have this legal framework which is very fragmented and does not yet address the sustainability issue of renewable energy technologies. But we can also say that the sustainability issue, the sustainability for renewable energy sources, is a current political and legal issue. These are new questions, a little bit late, but and we have some recent developments, and I would like to mention here 3 points. The sustainability and greenhouse gases reduction criteria are recently introduced in French law. They cover biomass consumed in France and the raw materials used for their production in France or abroad, and they include all stages of the chain up to the consumption. So this is more about this biomass renewable sources, and the objective is also to reduce the indirect consequences of the land use, especially related to this biomass production. The European Union is also committed to the Single Market for Green Products initiative. Of course, the Union European has also other initiatives, as we saw yesterday. But in this initiative, we can also notice this photovoltaic electricity production, so which is in this product environmental footprint category, and these rules will be applicable until 2022, and eventually ADEME, so French Agency for Ecological Transition, is currently publishing calls for research projects on sustainable energy. And if we look at these calls for research projects, the purpose is also on these questions, how to reduce the impacts of renewable energy technologies. So we can say this is a new challenge. This sustainability issue is a new challenge of the energy transition. And to conclude and also to contribute to a framework for renewable and sustainable energy transition, I would like to mention some important points. And first of all, environmental law should reconsider this sustainable development concept. As we can see, it must not be reduced to a principle of conciliation, to a conciliation of interests. And the renewable energy transition should also be taught through considering the intersection and interaction of these issues that can be summarized here in 3 dimensions: intergenerational, democratic, and sustainable. Environmental law should reconsider the temporality of sustainability and make better use of existing principles, such as the principle of non-regression. And this principle generates already intergenerational equity, because this principle prohibits subjecting future generations to a law that would reduce environmental protection. And finally, as Michel Serres said, the law may save nature, but to do so, it needs a transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary collaboration. And I would also like to drive attention to the lack of autonomy of law as a discipline, and to the need for collaboration between disciplines, starting from the concept of sustainability. And thank you very much for your attention, and I will be very happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. We have time for a few questions. No questions, comments? I know you didn't want a question, so I'll ask one. A very naive question, since I'm completely clueless about law, but I was kind of wondering, you mentioned what was being implemented in terms of regulations and law. I was wondering, considering the urgency of a required transition, how would you think it to be possible that we could have in the legislation something like an obligation of results?
In fact, thank you for your question. In fact, with all these examples, I try to demonstrate this very local and limited vision of the sustainability when talking about the renewable energy sources, renewable energy technologies. So I think we should enlarge the idea of space and time, and a more global thinking could be help this legal framework, but how to apply concretely with this obligation of results principle. And I think, as we can see in these recent developments, we have, and I also put on this last slide here, products and processes traceability. The solution at the beginning could be in this procedural regulations, especially concerning this access to information on this all these life cycle processes of renewable energy technology, and this could be a first step to apply an obligation on this I think first step.
Thank you. There are 2 more questions, so let's try 2 short questions and 2 short answers.
Thank you, lady. My question would be how solid this public interest concept is. Because if can be overridden, even if it's the Conseil d'État, I think it's problematic. So either the problem is with the Conseil d'État or with the concept.
In this decision, it was a little bit interesting because this was about the local need, but at the end, in this decision, that was underlined was the development of renewable energy sources contributes to the national objective. So this is a little bit confused between the public interest and national objectives regarding the renewable energy development and climate targets. So the conciliation between all these public interests could be very difficult, and because of this, and we already saw yesterday with this hierarchy idea and the principle of conciliation, it works more for these other interests than ecologic or environmental ones. So this is a very complex question.
Okay, last question.
And a little bit
Sorry.
Also political.
I'm pushing.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's just a quick one, because you said you wanted to enlarge, or we have to enlarge. I mean, you said it was really local and we had to enlarge the sphere. Where do you see the potential of action? Is it on the side of the EU, for example, where we see that, for example, the RED, the Renewable Energy Directive, already shapes the way that renewable energy is developed in the whole of the EU? Do you see it on this side, or is it even the UN? Is it on the French national level? What do you think?
Yes, I think it will depend on the product origins, and this for example, regarding the sustainability criteria related to the biomass, we already this international level, in fact, for this global thinking approach. For example, legally speaking, we talk about this legal forestry harvesting area. So this is again very difficult to decide which scale to decide about this sustainability concept. But I think this is, if we start from the materials, and we can also apply some criteria to which also bring these different stages, so European and international also.
Okay, so I think we should stop here. Thank you very much for the talk and the discussion. We have a 15-minute coffee break, so it's going to be 4:33, right? I'm trying to negotiate 3 extra minutes of coffee break compared to the program. So we reconvene at 4:33. And thanks again for the 3 speakers.